Israel doesn't want people to know this, and so they're shredding and burying these cars, and somehow, luckily, a few photos got out. Footage that has just come out from Al Jazeera, but it was taken, obviously, by the IDF, showing them obliterating vehicles as they go on October 7th. Let's play a little bit of this.
In the chaotic early hours of October 7, Israeli forces scrambled to engage Hamas fighters. Apache helicopter gunships fired onto cars driving towards Gaza, aware that some of them were carrying captives.
אני באוויר, באחת הגיחות נאמר כבר שיש...
He says, I was in the air during one of the sorties and they said there were abductees. The interviewer asked them, what do you do? He says, good question, super complex dilemma. This is exactly what so many of us have been saying for months, that Israel was operating under and continues to operate under the Hannibal Directive, which is kill everyone, kill the hostages, kill the people taking the hostages, kill everyone around the hostages, kill them all. And this is exactly what they did. And now we have the footage that proves it. And yet so many of us, especially in independent media who were willing to cover this stuff, so many of us were called Hamas propagandists and everything else. And yet here is the footage of the IDF just blowing up cars. They don't know who's in them. They don't know if there's hostages in the cars. And this is why there were hundreds, I mean literally hundreds of vehicles blown up on October 7th and 8th, and I'll come back to that in a moment. This IDF pilot says, yes, the whole decision is on us, is on the pilot, as to whether to blow up a car you see down on the ground.
Without guidance, some pilots said they joined local WhatsApp groups to help pick targets.
The idea that pilots have to get information from WhatsApp groups is truly remarkable. It's a sign of the initiative that people are looking for any way that they can get the information. This is an outrage. I mean, what kind of a way is that to fight a modern war?
At least 70 vehicles were hit by attack helicopters.
So he says 70 vehicles, but in fact, it was more than 70 if you count the vehicles that were just shot to hell with bullets. He said 70 were hit by helicopters. So I want to show you, and we'll come back to some of this footage in a moment, but I've brought this story to you before, but of course your mainstream media completely ignores it. What was done to those cars, those hundreds of cars? Here's an article, and this is an Israeli propagandist rag, but even they are reporting it, that Israel plans to bury hundreds of cars with ashes and blood stains. So obviously, this would be, if you wanted to have a legitimate investigation into what happened on October 7th, what actually went down, who killed who, how it went down, you would want to have all of this evidence. You would definitely want to see these cars, want to see what type of bullets ended up penetrating these cars, perhaps what blood is on the cars, whether they were burned or not, whether they were hit by an explosive or not. There's so many things about these hundreds of vehicles that you would want to know. Israel is shredding them and burying them. Initially, the reason that Israel gave for why they were going to shred and bury all of the cars was environmental reasons. It's just good for the environment to get rid of these hundreds of vehicles with tons of evidence on them. But now it seems that at least some of them have switched to a new reason. This is from Zaka Tel Aviv. Zaka is the propaganda. They're kind of like the White Helmets in Syria. They're a propaganda emergency group who goes in, and I don't doubt they help some people, but while they're helping people, they're also making up stories. Much of it has been debunked. You know, some of the stories about like beheaded babies and stuff that's all been debunked came from them. So they're just a propagandist outlet or organization. But one of the organization's units is dedicated to, quote, ensuring dignity and death. So that's why they're shredding and burying in an undisclosed location all of the vehicles that would prove that these vehicles were blown up by the IDF, not by Hamas. I'm not saying Hamas didn't shoot anyone. I want to be clear on that. I think anyone who says that is out of their goddamn minds. But these cars, many of them were blown up from the sky by the IDF. And these were cars, many of them didn't have any Hamas fighters or anything in them. Many of them were people, just for example, the most killing was at the proportion or percentage wise was at the Nova Music Festival, right? Hundreds of people killed. And many of them were in cars trying to leave the festival. The roads were blocked. And what happened to those cars? Well, here's an image of some of the cars before they've been shredded and buried. Thank goodness, at least we have this, even if we're not going to get the actual forensic evidence. But you'll notice several of the cars clearly hit by massive explosives. I mean, you can see a car here, roof caved in, entire thing flattened. You see multiple cars that are not hit by bullets, which seem to be the weapons that almost exclusively Hamas had, but instead blown up from the sky. These IDF orders to just blow up the cars that were leaving the Nova Music Festival. And again, you can see it with your own eyes. These are the explosions of attack helicopters that I'm not saying all of them, but these are not just guys with guns. A guy with a gun does not flatten a car. It's impossible. And Israel doesn't want people to know this. And so they're shredding and burying these cars. And somehow, luckily, a few photos got out. Another story that your mainstream media will not cover at all. They just act like, oh, 1,200 people were killed on October 7th. Yeah, 1,200 were killed, but many of those were killed by the IDF. We'll never know the actual proportion that were killed by the IDF. It seems like a lot. Let's continue for a moment from the Al Jazeera report with the video from the IDF. I don't know if the video got leaked from the IDF, or it's possible the IDF is actually putting out the video to say, look at all the wonderful work we did on October 7th. But either way.
Now, my concern is with this footage, we cannot tell whether they're Hamas gunmen or civilians or possibly hostages. And I don't believe the helicopter pilot or the machine gun operator would be able to tell either.
These big rounds have a certain area effect and obviously come at a certain rate that if you shoot at a group of people, you're most likely going to kill everyone. You are knowingly putting your own civilians at risk.
Knowingly. Key word there. Now, the IDF in Israel is trying to really play up the chaos of the moment. A lot of chaos going on. But even in the chaos of the moment, if you know that Hamas militants have come into Israel and are taking people, kidnapping people, you don't just blow up every car you see unless you want to kill the hostages, which was Israel's goal.
A detailed list of those killed on October 7. It found that 27 captives died somewhere between their homes and the Gaza fence.
So he's saying that on the list of those who have been killed, at least 27 were killed on the way back to Gaza, meaning they had been caught as hostages and they were being brought back to Gaza, and then they're obliterated from these helicopters, mainly in the sky, maybe tanks as well, but mainly helicopters. And something else you should know about those numbers of, this many captives died near the Gaza fence, on the way to the Gaza fence, etc., is that some have pointed out that several of those on that list were undercover plainclothes or whatever, military intelligence, etc. So when we hear 1,200 Israelis, civilians, or no, 1,200 Israelis, they don't say civilians because many of them were IDF. Some of them were IDF in uniform. Many of them were IDF not in uniform. Many of them were IDF veterans. Anyway, they don't say civilians. They say 1,200 Israelis were killed October 7th and 8th. And then they sometimes will say of those, this many were civilians, 600, 700. But we're learning that many of that 600, 700, whatever the number is, that were supposedly civilians, not all of them are actually civilians. People who have really dug into the names and who they are have been pointing that out. Thank you so much, Lee, for the donation. You rock, and you're keeping this show going, and thank you. I have fought against censorship and suppression for so long, many years now. It's been 2 years since my TV show was canceled by U.S. sanctions, and my YouTube with 250,000 subscribers banned around the world. I keep fighting, and thanks to you guys make it possible for me to keep fighting to get this information out there. And the new YouTube page is up to 65,000. I hope you guys will hit subscribe, and maybe we can get up to 70,000 here soon. You're making this show possible for me to keep doing this. I live stream 4 days a week, so I hope you will just show up because you're probably not going to get the alerts.